The House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
An author of a book called Just Stop, and it's a brief guide to rational thought for modern conspiracy theorists. And that's Ross Elder. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Ross, interesting you wrote this book. So tell us a little bit, who is Ross Elder, so that we kind of have an idea of where you're coming from.
I started writing essentially when I was in the military. I wrote for Soldier of Fortune magazine for a number of years and decided to start writing for other publications and online outlets and things like that, and then started my own website. I come from a varied background, really. Military, I was an investigator in the civilian world as well as in the military, and I used to train investigators and interrogators, and so my love of research and investigation is kind of what led me to a lot of the things that are found on my website. As far as conspiracy theories are concerned, I've written 8 books, and Just Stop is sometimes accused of not being a book because it's so brief, but I tell you it's brief right on the cover. So, yeah. It's fun. It's kind of tongue in cheek. You know, it's not really meant to be an academic work of any kind. But that's pretty much me. I've since retired from the military and now work in the civilian world, and I still write now and then, and I actually also make handmade custom hats the same way they were made in the 1800s, which is kind of a niche sort of thing.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. What made you decide to get into conspiracy theories, like both on your site and even in the brief book?
It was, if I can be honest, it was pretty much all the idiocy I was exposed to on a daily basis. I have a wide variety of contacts around the world, and I kept seeing things popping up on their social media, and that just threw up a bunch of red flags for me. And as I would talk to them about them, and pretty much they would reject the reality, and would prefer to, the confirmation bias essentially is what was driving a lot of it. They wanted to believe it. They wanted to believe that the person it was about would actually do that, even though they didn't. So even after you told them it wasn't true and showed them the evidence, it was still, well, this is still something they would have done anyway, so I'm not taking it down. And so I sort of, latched onto that and decided that I would just publicly humiliate people.
And how's that going?
I have a lot fewer friends now, which is nice, because my feed on my social media is a lot less cluttered. But it all started with the first conspiracy theory article I posted on my website was about Terrence Geeky, who was involved. It was the Oklahoma City bombing, and I kept seeing all these strange conspiracies about it, so I just started doing research myself, and I posted an article. And, the hate mail just started rolling in, because people want to believe these things, and it concerns me to a large degree, because when you talk to them and you get down to the nitty-gritty of it, a lot of them don't care whether it's true or not. They just want to help convince other people of their point of view, even if they're knowingly and willingly using false information, which led me to a lot of other websites and media figures who were doing the same things, and that's why it just sort of, it went from discussing minor conspiracy theories here and there that were on the, that were on the fringes of the internet to, wow, this person has a 5 million viewership on his YouTube channel, and he's spouting things that are absolutely false, and so, he's impacting that many lives. And so I branched out and started looking into a lot of other things.
So you're talking about Alex Jones.
That would be one, yes. Alex Jones, my arch nemesis.
Have you had a run-in
Alex
with
Jones. I have not, but he did post a video once that everyone said was about me, but he didn't mention me by name. So, yeah, he knows I'm out there, and I've been a thorn in his side for a number of years now.
Yeah, pretty crazy. So, how does this affect you with your family and stuff like that and friends? Have you come across people that have sort of been on conspiracies that they don't believe you?
I have a few friends who are like that. We've been able to maintain friendships. You know, we haven't parted ways because of it, but, you know, occasionally I sit down and have a heart-to-heart with them and show them how it isn't true. And sometimes they turn around. There are a couple of people who are contacts on my social media who still tell people that I turned them around because they were going down the rabbit hole. And I was able to show them the light in some way and help them get out of it. And now they're fairly normal people who are well adjusted.
So I've been pretty looking forward to chatting with you. So let me tell you one thing that happened today. There was a study released, and it said that it followed a class where they taught college students how to think critically. And what they found at the end of the class was that beliefs in pseudoscience-y nonsense stuff went down about 50%. So that when they taught people not what to think, but how to think and how to evaluate claims better, all of a sudden a lot of these things that are sort of, you know, nonsense claims, they just didn't buy into it anymore. So I mean, is that somewhere where we need to go? Do we need to start teaching people critical thinking in a way that we haven't done in the past?
Absolutely, and that seems to be one of the main topics that we discuss when I do talk to people about these sort of things, is that people aren't taught how to think critically or how to analyze anything. They're pretty much, you know, their little computer brains, it's garbage in, garbage out, and whatever they're concentrating on, whatever they're feeding it with, they just tend to believe it. And it may be improving now because of all of the media attention on conspiracies and, you know, the Russia thing and all of that, which was something that I broke, in fact, in 2015. I did an entire series of articles on Russian active measures and how they were manipulating the media and manipulating the voting populace here in the United States. And everyone ignored it because at that time, nobody cared about the Russians. You know, and then suddenly 2 years later, every news outlet on the planet was writing articles about it, none of which gave me any credit. You know, but I'm not bitter about it or anything like that at all. I even wrote a book about it called Patriot Deception. I wrote a novel a couple of years back, and it kind of goes through how they did it. It's kind of an action thriller kind of spy thing, but it goes through the process of how they manipulate people. And a lot of it happens because people are not critical thinkers. They're not taught how to think. They're taught what to think. And you hear that used a lot when people are talking about higher education today. It's more indoctrination than teaching you how to think about things and figure them out for yourself. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. I'm not an analysis, you know, person for higher education. I don't analyze those things, but that's why you hear it so often.
So what I tend to find in surveys is that higher levels of education tend to be correlated with less belief in conspiracy theories. But believe me, there are no shortages of conspiracy theorists on college campuses, whether it's in the faculty or in the student body. I mean, I teach a class myself on conspiracy theories, and I find when you get to the end of the class, a lot of students actually wind up giving up many of their conspiracy theories because they just realize that it's just based on nothing other than it sounded cool and there was one or two little bits of evidence that sounded convincing at the time. But once you start to think through it, it becomes, a lot of these things just devolve into nonsense.
Yeah, and it's because they don't know where to look for the information is a lot of it. They don't know the subject matter. So they hear somebody Let's talk about the Engineers for Truth, the 9/11 Engineers for Truth group. Oh, we have 1,400 engineers, and we're all in agreement that 9/11 was an inside job. Well, none of them are architectural engineers, construction engineers, or explosive engineers. They're like sound engineers from radio stations and things like that. Well, yeah, you're an engineer, but you don't know how to build a building or bring one down at all. So why are you even having this conversation? But they put the little name at the end, this person's an engineer. And if people aren't curious enough to want to get to the actual truth, they're not going to research that and find that out. What's the guy's name? How big something or other with a whole, that guy has all sorts of, letters and, stuff after his name, and they're all absolutely meaningless because they're things he bought on the internet. He's not an expert in any of those subjects at all, but because he has those letters after his name, people just assume he knows what he's talking about, and that's part of the problem. And think, well, this doctor is saying that vaccines cause autism, so okay, but is that person an actual doctor, or are they one of those holistic medicine, I sell essential oils kind of doctors? They don't understand the source of the information.
Yeah, so one thing I've always noticed when people say to me, what about all the engineers and architects for truth? I say, well, they've got 1,000 or 1,500 people, but there's, more than 1 million engineers and architects in the U.S. alone. So even this group is a tiny, tiny portion of the total number of engineers. And that's before you even get to the, what kind of engineer are they, and would they even know what they're talking about here? One thing I want to bring up here, and so Chapman University has done a repeated survey on paranormal and conspiracy beliefs, and I want to share some of the results with you and then get your response. So they've asked these questions 3 years in a row, and what they're finding in every question, the beliefs are going up. So, for example, I'll give you this one. When asked, can fortune tellers and psychics foresee the future? In 2016, you had 14% of Americans saying yes. It's gone up to 17%. So not a major increase, but you still got 17% of Americans saying that, fortune telling and psychic powers are a real thing. And there are much bigger numbers with other ones. So if you say, are there things like the ancient lost city of Atlantis? That's coming in at around 57%. And it's gone up 17% in the last 3 years. I mean, so there's a lot of, unsupported beliefs out there that seem to be held by majorities of people. What can we do? I mean, I guess, the title of your book sort of says it, just stop and think for a minute, but, what sort of tools do people need to have more specifically?
Well, the other thing they need to do is make the History Channel start showing actual history again. That might help a little bit. Or make them watch a documentary about the amazing Randy if they ever think a psychic is, a real thing.
I guess the other thing, too, they can make the Animal Planet shows about real animals rather than Bigfoots and mermaids. Yeah,
mermaids and Bigfoot. It's ridiculous. And the people are inundated with this stuff day in and day out. And I think a lot of the more paranormal skewed where people are going off into that realm probably has something to do with a diminishing of traditional religious belief in the world. As we become more evolved and, we're supposedly more intelligent and things like that, we're starting to, a lot of people from my generation started to reject traditional religion and religious belief, and took on these New Age beliefs that essentially are the same thing. They just changed the names of some of the stuff, and it's essentially the same thing. But then they raised their kids, we're not going to go to church and say a Hail Mary, but if you burn this incense in your room, it'll clean the bad spirit out. So that might have some impact on that part of the survey, because I honestly believe that people want to believe something, but then there's also a rebellious nature of people where they want to reject things that they're told to believe. And so I think the human mind is sort of has a predisposition to be manipulated in those sorts of ways. But to get away from it, I think people have to be more careful of what they watch, what they read, because if it's all that you're feeding your brain with, eventually you're just going to fall victim to it.
Yeah, there are a lot of other things that Americans seem to be infatuated with, like haunted houses is a majority belief. Bigfoot, they've never found a Bigfoot. 20%, 1 in 5 Americans believe in it. Aliens have come to Earth, 35%, so 1 in 3. And we would not prove any other contention with the sort of evidence that people bring forward for this stuff. But somehow these lower standards of evidence seem to work when it comes to these sorts of things. What can we teach people about evaluating evidence that they could do it better?
Well, the first thing you have to do is consider the source. The second thing you have to do is do all of the research that source claimed to have done yourself. And everybody does it. Everybody paraphrases. And this is one of the things that Russia did in their active measures during 2015, 2016 was they would post an article or they would take an article that was posted somewhere else. I'll use that as an example instead. And they manipulate the text only using the parts that support their point of view and leave off everything else. Now, and then they post it. And then for 10 years, InfoWars and Prison Planet and Above Top Secret and a bunch of other places told people that the mainstream media was the devil and they were traitors and it was all propaganda and you should stop listening to it. Well, what happened is they went to RT, to Russia Today, or they went to news from outside the United States, which was kind of dominated by China, Russia, Iran, and and they just assumed they were getting reliable sources from those, from those outlets, and they're not getting the whole story. But then U.S. outlets would take that information and post it, and then spread it, and then Russia Today would delete their article. So once it got spread, it would look like it came from a U.S. source, and if you did any amount of research, most of the conspiracy theories that I dealt with on my website, the amount of research that went into it was literally 10 or 15 minutes. That's it. Because they were that easy to debunk. But if people see it coming from a news outlet, they just assume that every word of it is, the truth and the whole truth. And very seldom is it ever the whole truth. So I tried to teach people to look for the whole truth instead of just the headline or the subtitle on something, and dig into that so that you understood the entire story, not just the little piece that somebody wanted you to know because it supported their opinion on something.
So
but Google is your friend.
Yeah. Well, I think I think a lot of the things online have gotten better. I mean, I remember, you could Google something vaccines and you would get a lot of anti-vax stuff. And now some of that has been cleaned up so that, the anti-vax things aren't your first websites coming up on these searches. And I think, YouTube has changed some things, particularly with vaccinations and whatnot. So things are getting better in terms of the information environment. It's just one line that I always hate that people say is they say, conspiracy theorists will tell people, go out and do your own research. And my response to that is don't. Is that there are a lot of things that, most people aren't, specialized enough to do their own research in. And they really should listen to the source experts on something. Like, don't go do your own research on astrophysics. Go talk to an astrophysicist.
Right.
And people apply this already in their life in certain ways, right? You wouldn't say, well,
Right.
oh, you got to install some plumbing, go do your own research. No, go hire a plumber.
Right. Now,
So-
yeah, and I'm a little, I'm not being very detailed in that because I should explain when I say go do your own research, I'm talking about academic research, not looking for news articles on something, especially if it's something complex. You go Google the subject matter and find a peer-reviewed paper on such and such, subject and study it, what the experts said in a peer-reviewed process. Because you're right. If you get on there and Google, anything, 9/11 inside job, the first thing that it's going to pop up is going to be a bunch of propaganda, a bunch of conspiracy websites and things like that, and info wars all over the place. You have to weed through that to get to the actual investigative documents that show the results and the findings of a legitimate investigation, and study that. You have to skip over all the chaff and get to the core of the issue.
Yeah, because one thing that's sort of interesting is that the people who disagree with the 9/11 report never read it. And,
Right.
And so, knowing they're not going to read it, I'll tell a lot of 9/11 truthers and say, well, read the Debunking 9/11 Myths by Popular Mechanics. No, I won't read that. That's propaganda. So there's really nothing you can give some people that they're going to read because they don't want to have their mind changed sometimes. I mean,
they get married to these beliefs, and some people are never going to give them up. But, it's the same thing with the Mueller report. Everybody on the planet's talking about the Mueller report, and like 5 people actually read it. So, but that's on both sides of the aisle. I mean, before the thing came out, politicians were coming out telling you what was in it, but they hadn't read it either. So, if you're prone to being influenced by personalities or positions simply because of a position somebody holds, then you're kind of screwed.
So what can we do? I mean, if you were to say, here's what needs to happen, whether it's in early childhood education or at a later level, I mean, what are sort of the bullet points that have to happen in order to create perhaps people who are going to believe better stuff?
Well, one of the things that I did with my children when they were teenagers and they suddenly were exposed to a lot of these things was the first thing I would ask them is, why do you believe that? And make them explain to me how they came to this conclusion. And in general, it would come up with, they would come up with, well, I saw it on the internet, or I was reading this article on the internet from Above Top Secret. And I would walk them through, okay, well, let's look at the actual incident, the actual case. If it was something legal, we would get on and search and find it and read through the actual investigative data that's there, which would say something completely different. And that's the first thing that people need to do is even ask yourself, why do I believe that? And in general, it's just going to be because somebody else told them, or, instead of discovering it for themselves. So teaching people to think critically, it has to start at an early age because it's really hard to turn them around when they're in their 30s. And because they're going to resist all of that. But if you can catch it in the formative stage of the, when their brain is still developing and you see them start to go down these weird paths, you can walk them back and have them, figure it out for themselves, show them the error in their thinking or this part of the evidence is missing, but it's over here, it's all right there in the book, but the person who's telling you about the book is only taking this one paragraph out of it, which, hello, Bible, you do that all the time. But teaching someone to actually become an investigator and researcher is a little more difficult. That takes time. You have to teach them, actual technique, and a lot of it is tedious work that nobody really likes doing. I did it for years, but I still didn't actually enjoy it. It was the end result that was enjoyable. But you could get, some books on investigative techniques and proper research, and that would be a good start, because then, stop looking at everything at face value, because almost nothing is as it seems in today's world.
So the internet, is it a positive or a negative?
I once said that the internet could have been the greatest invention of humankind. People argue whether it is or not. I think it's had the greatest impact on humankind in the last century, but whether that impact was positive or not is very debatable. But I have this thin line I have to walk, because I'm a very pro-Constitution guy and a very pro-freedom of speech guy. I don't agree with people being banned from different platforms because people disagree with what they have to say. That's just not the America I was raised in, where, I'm the child of the 60s and grew up in the 70s, and, we were taught, look, people are marching and, getting beaten with sticks and hit with fire hoses right now because they want to make sure they have the rights that they're entitled to under our Constitution. And so, yeah, they're privately owned platforms like Facebook and Twitter, and they can do whatever they want. But I don't really agree with even Alex Jones, even though it doesn't matter how much I dislike him or how many times I've debunked virtually everything he's ever said on the air. He has a right to put his voice out there. So I'm very much on the fence about whether or not I think the internet is very bad for our kids, and unfortunately a lot of adults who don't understand the internet and that everything on there isn't true. But it could have been so useful to humankind, and we've turned it into cat videos and ancient aliens and stuff.
Well, hold on, I'll show you what I had for dinner.
Yeah. Let's take a picture of your eggs Benedict and your cat.
Yeah.
And let's talk about ancient aliens and stuff.
Yeah, I just wonder, but I agree with the free speech, but when you have people that are going out of their way to create fake stories, like when you say, okay, well, that shooting never happened at Pulse nightclub or Columbine or in Paris,
right,
that it's fake, and then you put that out there.
Yeah.
When you actually create a lie, I mean, yeah, freedom of speech, but where do we draw the line? Is that like yelling fire in a movie theater? That I just, it's kind of a thin line.
Yeah, that's the big question, and I'm far too low on the totem pole to have any impact on any of that. But I mean, I do agree with you, and there are a large number of people out there who are intentionally creating fake things, and you have to wonder how many millions of people are they, impacting, because before the internet, everyone knew an idiot. Okay, everybody knows one.
Yeah.
But that idiot and his opinions were maybe going to impact 5 or 6 people, and most of those people are just going to know he's an idiot, and they shouldn't be listening to him. But now, that same idiot can have an audience of 200 million people on the internet. People who don't know him, have no idea who he is, don't know that he's actually an idiot, but he's putting things on the internet, and now he can reach millions of people. And even if a tenth of them buy into his garbage that he's spouting, you're having a negative impact on the world. And so I really, really have an issue with the internet. I tried to keep my kids off the internet as long as possible, but it doesn't work because they have to have the internet for school now. So,
good
bring a Chromebook. Yeah, it's impossible.
You're going to have to move somewhere in Idaho and
right
and hide.
Yep, and we're Amish country down here in this part of Ohio. That would be the ultimate for me. But the kids are never going to go for that.
So I'm a little bit long on the internet. I never see the internet itself as a problem. I mean, to me, people are the problem, and they've existed long before the internet. And there was nonsense and conspiracy theories and all sorts of goofy beliefs long before the internet had shown up. Yeah. And I'm not convinced at this point that it's gotten worse. And in fact, there isn't really strong evidence that it's gotten worse. I mean, you can say anecdotally that, nonsense can travel faster and farther, but I mean, the levels of people believing stupid stuff across most things, is sort of fairly stable. And it's just, to me, it's something that's, we need better software patches on our hardware, and inside our brains to make us think better. And we haven't gotten to that point yet. And I think maybe, noticing what's going on the internet shouldn't make us fix the internet. It should make us fix each other. And I hope that's what happens in the next few years.
Yeah, humans are always the problem. And I think a lot of it, I don't know if it would be academically or professionally, however you wanted to alter it, but even the people who write the headlines for articles that you find on the internet, the headlines are always incredibly misleading, or they don't actually convey the content of that article at all once you get into the meat of the article. And as far as journalistic standards, I don't really know if any exist anymore, because you can call yourself a journalist and just get online and, look at me. I built a website and I post articles on it. I'm a journalist now. But not really. I don't have a journalism degree. I didn't get any sort of formal training or anything, but anybody can be a journalist. And it seems like the standards for hiring journalists, even at the traditional outlets, has dropped pretty low. So we can't even get them to write an honest headline for an article because it's all about clicks now.
Well, I'll give you a good example of this that's sort of bothering me this week, is that you have all these articles coming out in the Washington Post and the New York Times and other places all about UFOs. And it's written in a way to make it sound like, there's aliens flying around. Like Washington Post headline, May 28th, 2019. UFOs exist, and everyone needs to adjust to that fact. Right. I mean, it makes it sound like there's aliens floating around in the sky, and there's no such thing. No. And really all they're saying is people saw things and they don't know what they are. Well, so what?
Right. Yeah. And my first conspiracy that I ever looked in because it interested me was UFOs. And that was back in the days before the internet. I was a kid growing up, watching. I lived across the street, literally across the street from an Air Force base. And so I saw things flying in the sky day and night. And there were a few times I saw things that I had never seen before, and I had no explanation for. And, of course, my dad would tease me and say that those were the aliens. Watch out, it's because they'll come and get you. And, he was just teasing me, but it made me fascinated by this thing by watching things fly around in the sky. And I spent years reading books and looking at different things. And then as my life experience changed, for instance, being old enough to understand what I was seeing in the sky next door to that Air Force base, and then going into the military myself and being exposed to even perhaps some classified programs that other people didn't know about. And then I had explanations, like the stealth fighter, the F-117. In the 1970s, most of your UFO sightings turned into triangular-shaped craft, triangular or bat-wing-shaped craft. And that's because the F-117 and the B-2 Spirit were being developed during the 1970s. The F-117 started flying and entered the inventory in 1977, and people don't understand that. So it was a full 20 years later before anybody knew the thing existed. And typically when the government lets you know some of their secret programs exist, that means they've already replaced them, probably 2 or 3 generations ago. So we've been flying experimental craft since the 40s. And the whole flying saucer craze, the sighting that launched the term flying saucer, they were Horton flying wings. that were flying in formation, and that's a known fact. The Air Force verified all of that. This was a flight of Horton flying wings that were experimental aircraft. And a guy saw them from a distance, didn't know what they were, so look, it's aliens. And I have yet to see a video that I can't explain of a UFO. Some of them are obvious fakes, some of them are obviously, graphic artists getting a little carried away. But one of the funniest was, this was a few years ago, someone showed something that looked like a soup can floating in the sky. And it was obviously spinning because of the shimmering of the shell of the thing. And it flew up and it flew sideways and came back and then it went back down. And it was in the age of the internet, but it was about 10 years ago, and it went everywhere. Look at this thing this guy videotaped. Well, we don't know what it is. It must be aliens. But NASA released a video that same week showing this soup can-shaped object that they were experimenting with back when they were trying to develop recoverable launch technology. Boosters that would fly up and launch a satellite and then land themselves and come back down, just like the Dragon, and stuff is doing today. NASA was experimenting, and it was a video taken of outside of a test bed where NASA was flying this thing. But even though NASA released a video of it the same week, the NASA video had 20 views, and the one that was posted on the, Hey Look UFOs website had 1 million views. So it was very easy to find out what it was, but nobody went to the trouble.
Yeah, people prefer the alien stuff to the real stuff.
Yeah. I've seen things flying in the sky, and I'm not going to say too much, but when I was in Afghanistan, I saw things flying in the sky. One of which, if you do the research, the government tells you does not exist at all. And the other one, they won't mention because, I don't know what you saw, but that's not us. Even though, obviously, it is, because nobody's flying in the skies in Afghanistan other than us without being shot down. So, But, it's really, really advanced technology, and it's something that I'm sure they didn't intend for me to see. It was outside of my realm, but it's obviously something based on current technology, but more advanced than that, and it's probably an unmanned sort of thing.
Well, Joe,
but it's not an alien.
No, not an alien. I'm pretty sure if I could see it, so could the air defense people. So I'm assuming if it was an alien or something we didn't know was supposed to be there, there would have been all sorts of chaos going on.
Well, it's sort of funny because a lot of the language that we use around this, like unidentified flying object, should say, okay, we don't know what it is, full stop. Or experimental aircraft. Like every aircraft is experimental until they start mass producing it, right? But you think, experimental, it must have alien technology. So people are sort of trained to hear, words that should be normal and just say, it's not necessarily of another planet, but they think, it's an alien thing. But that's where the culture is, I think. Device. Yeah, that's where the culture is. It just leads people to these conclusions. So, like the Washington Post and New York Times know exactly what they're doing when they put UFO in a headline. They know they're saying alien.
And that's why the government started using a different acronym now. It's UAP, Unknown Aerial Phenomenon.
That doesn't sound better.
It doesn't sound better, but it's different than UFO. And people don't understand, and I don't know why, because I knew this as a child, that UFO simply means it's unidentified by the observer. It doesn't mean anybody else doesn't know what it is.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean if you call, the local Air Force base and say, hey, I see this giant cigar-shaped thing over here. I don't know what it is. It must be aliens. They're going to go, oh, okay, we'll look into that. Because they know what it is, but they're not going to tell you. They're not going to say, oh, no, that's this giant Zeppelin we've been working on in the middle of the night that you weren't supposed to see. So,
I heard a new one yesterday on an interview, USO.
The underwater one?
Yeah, the unidentified submerged object or something.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, that term's been out for a while because there was there was a sighting. I'm not going to remember the details, but I believe it was a U.S. Navy vessel that some of the sailors on there had a sighting of something they claimed came out of the water and then flew away, which could actually not be an alien, but with technology that we actually have today, that sort of vehicle is possible. If you can launch a rocket, a nuclear missile out of a submarine, you can launch something else. So, but people don't put those things together. Then that 2 and 2 together doesn't work. Oh, we can launch an intercontinental ballistic missile off of a submarine underwater, but we couldn't possibly launch a UAV or something out of one. That's absurd,
And they've become real scientists now. Ufologists.
Right. Yes.
Cryptozoologists. They sound like they've been to university.
Yeah, I don't know where you get those titles, because I would like to have one. But I will tell you that MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, there's a fairly local branch office here. And I was bored, and I had some free time after I got out of the military, and then I only had 2 jobs instead of 3. So I was like, that would be fun. There was an advertisement, become a MUFON investigator. So I went through their process. I sent in an application. I sent in all my, my documentation of my training, experience, and investigations and research, and working with classified projects in the military and everything. And I never heard anything from them, because they don't want someone like me to work for them. They want somebody who believes. They want Fox Mulder working for MUFON, because they're going to go, hey, look at this video. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's a UAV. I saw the same thing 5 years ago. They don't want me working for MUFON. And I was a little disappointed, because I thought it would be fun.
Yeah, I think that it's they've obviously just what they want to promote what's going on, right? Yeah, MUFON.
Yeah, you have to sell books and videos and things. You can't do that if you're debunking everything.
Yeah, you'd be a sore thumb. Yeah, it'd be no good.
Yeah, yeah, wouldn't make any money.
No. And Joe knows it all. He works for the government.
I don't make any money either.
No. he's a shill. He gets money from the government. He's really CIA.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Good work if you can get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
now, what's your website so that people can look you up if they don't know you?
It's my website that covers a lot of the conspiracy stuff is ross-elder.com, like ross-elder.com. That's where the bulk of that stuff is found. All of my books are on Amazon. That's the only conspiracy-related book that's actually a non-fiction book that I wrote. My other books are more action-adventure type stuff. But that's where it can all be found, and that's where all my research on what I called the Patriot Deception, which was the manipulation of the Patriot community in the United States by Russia and Iran and China, is all on there as well. And those articles were actually presented at an intelligence conference to all the heads of the intelligence communities here in the United States a couple of years ago. And I still didn't get any credit. So
must be a conspiracy.
I think that's the only conspiracy I can confirm, is that nobody wanted to talk to me in 2015, 2016. But if you go on Twitter now, people are talking about me now, and have been for the last year or so, because people have discovered all that, and they're like, wait a minute, this guy talked about this 4 years ago. I'm like, yeah, where were you people 4 years ago when I could have sold some books?
Yeah. Is that it? Is that the biggest conspiracy going right now? Is about patriotism and Russia?
Well, that seems to be the one everybody wants to talk about now, but they're talking about it in the wrong context, because what people are saying went on isn't what actually went on. And Russia is an old hand at active measures and propaganda and manipulating populations. They've been doing it for decades. As a matter of fact, there's probably more than 1 million people in Africa who are dead because of Russian active measures and propaganda. Because when Western aid organizations were going to Africa and helping treat people who had HIV and AIDS and offering them, help and treatments and things like that, the Russians started spreading news articles, fake news, which I think is a term I coined years ago, actually, but that the Western aid agencies were actually infecting people with it instead of helping, try to find a cure or give them a treatment. The Russians actually spread the propaganda that these Western aid agencies were infecting people with it, intentionally trying to reduce the population in Africa. And so people stopped going to the aid agencies. And the same thing happened just a couple of years ago with the Ebola outbreaks. People wouldn't go to the aid agencies because of the conspiracy theories that they had been exposed to that made them believe that people were being given Ebola in these clinics instead of being given treatment. And so, and I forget the name of the operation. The Russians actually had a name for this operation that they conducted in Africa with the AIDS epidemic that was going on over there. And probably easily 1 million people lost their lives because of that. And it was all just Russia trying to be the foil against, the West, to prevent the West from being seen as the savior who was going to come in and help people. And they still do it. They've been doing it for decades. They're always going to do it.
Well, they had help from a lot of elites in Africa too. I mean, you had people over there in positions of authority saying, don't get the medicine, get massage and vitamins instead. And
right.
So there's a lot of important people who should know better bought into this stuff and then spread it to everybody.
Yep, and the same thing happens here. How many politicians could we ask, right now, who believe vaccines are going to kill their children? There's got to be at least 1 or 2 congressmen up there who believe that. Since you had one who thought Guam was going to flip over if you put too many Marines on it, you have to assume that if there are idiots of that magnitude in Washington D.C., somebody in Congress believes that vaccines are causing autism.
Oh, well, Michelle Bachmann, who ran for president a few years ago, she went into a presidential debate and said that the HPV vaccine made people, quote, retarded. And that's insane.
That is kind of insane. She's an idiot. So there you have it. That's the only evidence you need that woman is an idiot and should never be in a position of power. And I'm sure probably, I don't know, we're not getting the best and brightest from, and maybe the position doesn't pay well enough. I don't know. If we paid them $1 million a year, maybe we'd get a higher caliber candidate. That's a possibility. And in the grand scheme of things, that's not that much, since we're only like $100 trillion in debt or something. Yeah. So, what's another $465 million a year? Who cares? But I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know how these people get elected, because virtually every politician I see get up and talk in front of a TV camera, the first words out of my mouth are idiot.
Yeah, certainly it. Well, again, it's been a really good conversation, and I'll have your folks up on the website as well as your website, so our listeners can just click right on it. Again, our guest has been Rod Elder. Just Stop. Thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. It was fun.
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.